Okay, so without further ado, it's 5 o'clock. Welcome to the Thursday, April 11th, 2024 Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting. Permit me to confirm that all members who are present can be heard. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Present.
Tim Brain.
Here.
Seth Engelborg.
Here.
Mike Miserelli.
Here.
Joe Pandowski.
Here.
Linda Williams.
Here.
This meeting is being held entirely remotely, so all participants.
Ian, I think you don't need to read the script anymore.
You don't need to read the script anymore. We got that word last week.
Really?
Yeah.
As long as you take roll attendance, you're pretty good.
Cool.
That's the easy part.
That's all I
Okay.
give you. That's all I'd help, Ian.
He
Hey,
just has to announce it's being.
I need all the help I can get,
recorded.
Mark. Thank you very much. Thank you, Linda. So, okay, we'll start the meeting with public comment on items not being heard this evening.
There is a
And
hand up.
you see a hand up? I do not see a hand up. Whose hand is up?
Spruce's hand up.
Bruce.
Martin Balkind.
Yes, Spruce.
Burton Balkind for the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. I had sent some information in about 289 and the property adjacent to Hummock Pond Road. If this is going to be a long meeting, I'm happy to defer it to next week's meeting if we don't want to just get into that right now since we have a lot on our plate at this meeting. But I did want to confirm that I did send the information and did want to talk about it at some point.
Okay, Spruce, if you, depending on how long the meeting is, let's at least make sure we discuss it next week.
Okay, I'll be sure to be on public comment for next week. Thank you.
Yep. And really quickly, Mr. Chair, Spruce, Will and I have some updates to some of your questions. One of us will give you a call or set up a time with email to address some of those tomorrow.
Oh, great. I might not even have to bring it up at the next meeting then. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to public hearing notices of intent. We have the first is Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, Town of Nantucket, 41 through 119 Baxter Road, various SE 483736. Jeff, do you have something to say about that one?
All right. Yeah, so we were conducting our staff review on oh, sorry, we're on 3736. That 3736 is the GO2 project, Mr. Chairman, not the core project.
Sorry, it was listed first. Why don't I, if commissioners don't have any objection, if we could handle the second one first, which is Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, 59 through 83 Baxter Road, various SE 483759.
Yeah, so real quickly, we were doing our staff review on that, and we've talked to the applicant about this too, is we have some paperwork concerns to keep up where some of that work that's being proposed is pretty clearly on land of the town, and the town hasn't signed the application as property owner at this point. So I think I would suggest, and Dwight is nodding his head, so hopefully he'll agree, that we'll just carry it to our next meeting on the 25th, and hopefully we'll resolve the paperwork prior to. I just don't feel comfortable with us permitting something that we don't have all of the permissions to permit. So,
Thank you, Jeff. Dwight, do you wish to make a comment?
Yes, Ian, I'd just like to comment that yes, on behalf of the applicants, the request has gone to the town manager for signature on the notice of intent application form. So that has been submitted and we're requesting that. And on the related matter that we discussed last week on an emergency certification for the damage that occurred during last week's storm, we did send in a letter to Jeff, and we're putting, we just wanted to note that that also has gone to the town for signature as an owner. So that is essentially on hold as well, since the town is a co-owner there. So I think with that, we do respectfully request a continuance on those matters. The homeowners did want me to note that they did experience quite a bit of damage, so they still want to pursue the emergency certification, and it's important to be done, but we also acknowledge the need to take care of these administrative matters properly.
Thank you, Dwight. Okay, so that then brings us on to SBPF Town of Nantucket 41 through 119 Baxter Road. SE 48, 37, 36. So now we really reserve this time for people, members of the public who wanted to discuss or bring their opinions forward. But Dwight, I see you got your hand up first. I don't see any other hands up, actually. So
yeah, yes, Ian. Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Attorney Nyland is not on yet, but he just wanted me to mention in the introduction that, just as you mentioned, we understood that tonight's meeting was primarily to hear from the public, get their comments. We'll be taking notes so that we can, take those comments under advisement. And we do request that, there may be certain issues that we may choose to respond to this evening verbally, but otherwise we'll be taking notes so that we can provide a comprehensive response to the comments that we've received to date from the commission members and from the public.
thank you, Dwight. So I now see Julie Ruddick Mead's hand up. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you.
I think I'm speaking at the right time, but if I'm not, this is because I don't know that numbers. This is the geotube extension conversation, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Would you
good.
mind identifying yourself?
I'm going to. Yes, I'm going to. So thank
Okay.
you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Not at all.
My name is Julie Ruddick Mead. I am the executive director of the Sconset Trust, which is the owner of the Sankaty Head Lighthouse, is one of, if not the largest landowners on Baxter Road. We've owned the lighthouse and the surrounding 7 acres of property since 2007. And after raising the necessary funds, moved it 280 feet to protect it from rising sea levels and the eroding bluff. As I think we can all agree, the lighthouse serves as a symbol for Nantucket for thousands of visitors, including year-rounders, summer residents, and tourists. All you have to do is stand on Baxter Road to witness the constant flow of people biking, jogging, walking, and driving up to the lighthouse for photographs, hugs, and a couple times a year, even a climb to the top. According to Arcadis, a global design, engineering, and management consulting firm, the geotubes have mitigated erosion, and their removal would hasten erosion, causing a more imminent breach in Baxter Road. The lighthouse currently sits on the boundary of the trust's property, thanks to an easement from Sankaty Head Golf Club, and we currently have nowhere else to move it. The eroding bluff would require removal of several homes, plus the relocation of the road and the infrastructure provided to the remaining houses. Access to the lighthouse would become very limited and arduous. The trust is committed to cooperating with all entities working to slow bluff erosion and mitigate sea level rise in Sconset, as well as across the entire island. As such, in the fall, we supported the Select Board's refiling of the Notice of Intent with Conservation Commission for the geotube expansion project. We now hope that the Conservation Commission will vote in favor of the proposed geotube expansion project so that together we can all find the best possible plan for continued access to Baxter Road and our beloved lighthouse. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Well, thank you. And as a child, I used to have that wavering yellow light come into my bedroom window back in the
Yes.
day.
Well, it's great that it's back.
All right. Doug, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I guess you can see me now. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Doug Rose. I'm speaking tonight as an interested member of the public, and I will be reading from notes so as to be respectful of all of your time. Tonight, I'd like to briefly highlight 4 suggestions as you consider your next steps relating to the current notice of intent. First, regarding the request for pre-approval. As I've detailed in my letters to you on this subject, the 4,700-foot project area and even just the initial geotube section of phase one significantly overreach the applicant's own definitions of imminent risk. The NOI frames this as a benefit. It refers to it as a phased approach and requests that the Concom grant pre-approval to these future phases, such that the escalation to hard armoring could be approved by staff or other designee without a vote by a future Concom. If this commission were to grant this pre-approval request, you'd in effect surrender the Concom's regulatory authority and abdicate its oversight responsibilities on future phases of revetment expansion along nearly a mile of public beach for nearly 5 years. For these reasons, as a matter of principle, the Concom should dismiss any notion of pre-approval of future interventions on this or any other wetland resource areas. Number two, regarding the removal plan, all parties understand that there will come a time when the geotubes must be removed. And based on this discussion at the March 14th hearing, there appears to be agreement that without an airtight removal plan, no expansion will be happening. Based on recent experience with the current removal order, the Concom should insist on a removal plan that is fully within its authority to enforce. This plan should therefore include not only proof of an enhanced bond that is sufficient to cover future removal costs, but also proof of easement agreements that ensure timely relocation of any structures that might be put at jeopardy by a future removal order. Number three, failure triggers, and in particular, the definition of a walkable beach. The applicant's position is that the beach will cease to be walkable once the mean high water line reaches the second tier of the geotubes for 2 consecutive quarters. This failure trigger was flawed when it was inserted into the order of conditions for the existing geotubes, and I think it remains flawed now for at least 2 reasons. First, as a failure trigger, it's a catch-22. Think about it. Once the mean high water line reaches the geotubes, by definition, there would be insufficient fronting beach to safely remove them without a Chapter 91 license. Secondly, it fails the common sense test. As a practical matter, the beach will no longer be walkable well before the mean high water line reaches the geotubes. With these lessons in mind, I encourage the Commission to develop an objective definition of walkable beach that is clear, measurable, and makes common sense. And finally, monitoring. This NOI relies on outdated Woods Hole Group surveys and LiDAR data from 2021. Given the magnitude of this proposal, the Concom should insist on updated beach and bank profiles that reflect the changes from the past several storm seasons before any permitting decisions can be considered. This can be in addition to a pre-construction survey, as has been recommended by the applicant's representatives. So to recap, I urge the Concom to take these 4 next steps. 1, firmly dismiss any notion of pre-approval. 2, require an airtight removal plan. Number 3, clarify the definition of walkable beach so that it makes common sense. And 4, update the monitoring data before considering any permitting decisions. In closing, I'd like to thank the commissioners for your consideration tonight and for volunteering so much of your time to preserving Nantucket's wetland resources. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you for all the work you've done. It's definitely added to what we have to consider. So, RJ Turco.
Thank you, Commissioner Golding. RJ Turcotte on behalf of the Nantucket Land and Water Council. We also submitted a comment letter on Friday, the first half of which is just detailing things that we still have questions or concerns about in the current notice of intent. And then the second half of our letter is sort of an introduction to something that we have been sort of brainstorming and thinking about as this process has rolled along since January and since the notice of intent has come out. We've sat down with Dr. David Kriebel and our own coastal engineer. We consult with Trey Ruthven to look at what else could work here and how to hold the line on the bluff and how that can coincide with alternative access. And now that those plans are 90% complete and Vince Murphy and Arcadis have worked incredibly hard and jumped over a lot of hurdles to make that possible, this is a really rare opportunity that no other commission before this one has had before. And that is the fact that for decades, there has been no plan or idea of how this could work, how the utilities could be moved back. And now that they are in place, myself, Land and Water Council staff, along with Trey Ruthven and Dr. Kriebel, talking back and forth, discussing it, we really thought about what is the minimum necessary thing to hold the line for 3 years is right now what the alternative access is planning on, but assuming there are delays, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Statistically, what kind of storms would the bluff be facing, and what kind of conditions has it seen historically? How have other things performed at the toe of the bluff? All with the idea of not overbuilding a toe protection if we don't need to. So right now, the proposal, the notice of intent before you, proposes to install expanded geotubes, which have a design life of half a century. And at this point, we don't feel there's a need to install something so hard to remove and that's so impactful on the littoral system if in less than 10 years we're able to provide alternative access to the lighthouse and all these homes along Baxter Road. So I won't go into any further detail other than the fact that I'm really excited about this. I feel like this is something that Dr. Kriebel is going to present on that is permittable under the local bylaw and the state bylaw, and will protect those homes for the time being, and will mesh really nicely with what's going on the other side of the bluff. So looking forward to hearing from Mr. Kriebel. Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Any further?
We have Mr. Kriebel's hand up. Spruce
Excellent.
and Ms. Greenberg just raised her hand as well.
I don't actually see Mr. Kriebel's hand up.
Oh.
So.
It is.
Dr. Kriebel, please. Good afternoon.
First of all, thank you for letting me join you. I have to confirm I'm having some difficulties on my end as well, Mr. Chair. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think my video is not working, but I don't think that will matter too much. You've seen me before. Thank you for letting me speak with you, and good evening, commissioners. And I think, as most of you know, I'm involved in this issue on behalf of the Greenhill family. The letter I submitted was my attempt to come up with what I think is an alternative to the proposed geotube expansion. One that I, first of all, don't believe has been explored sufficiently in the past, and two, one that might help balance the many competing interests that are at play here. As I see it, there are numerous divergent viewpoints on the geotube expansion issue, and as is often, maybe usually true in coastal engineering issues like this, what is best for one party is almost always worse for another party, and vice versa. So the question is, can we outline interests of the various parties and come up with a plan that might best balance those competing interests? And I think we can, based on something that's called the FEMA 540 rule. In the Code of Federal Regulations, FEMA has codified what coastal engineers call the 540 rule, which is very simple. It states that a primary sand dune should have at least 540 square feet of cross-sectional area above the 100-year flood level in order to provide a complete protection and storm barrier to prevent breaching of that dune in a 100-year storm. What alerted me to this is the applicant's proposal that along with the geotubes, they plan to place 22 cubic yards per linear foot of sand to provide a 100-year level of protection in the storm event. Well, if you convert units, and I won't do the math on screen since you can't see me, but the 540 square feet converts over to 20 cubic yards per linear foot of volume. So I think, as you can see, what FEMA says is needed to protect the dunes is actually a little bit less than what the applicant has proposed placing on top of the geotubes. So as a result, the 22 cubic yards per linear foot that the applicant has said they would place has the potential to provide protection of the bluff from erosion in a 100-year storm without use of geotubes or without use of any other fixed or semi-permanent structure. So given that, I guess I was led to ask the question, are the geotubes needed at all? In my letter, you can see a In my letter, you can see a drawing that we've come up with for what this sand coir berm may look like. It's a form of dune nourishment where the sand would be placed on the lower portion of the bluff slope, and it would cover and bury a coir terrace structure that would provide backup storm protection. This concept is not new. As I noted in my letter, I have a client in Alaska that's using this concept very successfully in storm events that are quite a bit larger than the 100-year event in Nantucket. Arcadis noted this concept of dune protection, but did not really advance the concept any further. And I think if we had at the time had considered the FEMA 540 rule, perhaps they would have. In addition, obviously, the coir terraces and sand have been successfully used south of the existing geotubes for many years. And in fact, they now form not only the emergency repair that's going on, but also coir terraces and dune nourishment is the proposed solution for the regions on the southern end of the proposed expansion project. So I think what I'm proposing is basically using the same concepts, a coir terrace covered by sand, and extending that throughout the area where the geotubes were proposed to be extended. The difference here would be the amount of sand, and that is that the 22 cubic yards per linear foot would be sufficient to provide this 100-year storm protection. To be clear, this is not a permanent solution. This solution is a short to midterm plan that I think allows the implementation of the Baxter Road access to continue. The plan buys time. How much time then depends on, of course, the vagaries of nature, but also on how well the system would be maintained. I will note that throughout the U.S., sand placement in various forms is the preferred alternative for issues like this. And in fact, just last year, the U.S. placed about 20 million cubic yards of sand in different nourishment schemes. So this system would be similar, and that would be a dune composed of sand that would be sacrificial in nature, and it would erode in storms and would have to be repaired. One of the things I like about the plan is that it could be repaired using the adaptive management methods that the applicant has proposed. So as long as they can keep more than 20 cubic yards per linear foot, they should have the protection for the 100-year storm. A key advantage of the plan is that it uses much less sand than what the applicant proposes. By my estimate, by the time you fill geotubes and then add the sand on top of them, they were looking at about 71,000 cubic yards of sand being needed for the entire project over the area that I've been looking at. Using the sand coir berm, I think you cut it almost in half to a little over 39,000 cubic yards of sand. So I believe this approach can help satisfy the interest of the SBPF and the town to protect the Sconset Bluff using sand instead of a structure. It satisfies adjacent property owners in that sand is freely available in the littoral system, just like it would be if the bluff was naturally eroding. I think it satisfies community and environmental groups in that it's using an all-natural, nature-based approach. And I think it satisfies many of the town's interests, including not being encumbered by a semi-permanent structure that's hard to remove. In fact, this is basically a self-removing system. As I outlined, there are many other aspects that I find attractive. I think you can read many of them on the list. I'll just list a few. The project is much simpler to construct, requires very little excavation, can be done without approaching mean high water, avoids the issue of whether a coastal engineering structure should protect gap lots, and it also avoids the issue of a fixed structure being built on the town-owned part of the beach. I think the approach provides a powerful incentive for SBPF to maintain the project in their own self-interest through their adaptive management plans. It's possible the town would not need stringent triggers for enforcement action, as without the sand, SBPF would be diminishing their own protection. And I think the plan can, as I mentioned, buy time. It does not preclude future plans, and the system could revert to either a no project or a future coastal engineering structure as appropriate. And the one I'm most excited about is the potential that if the town were involved in a designed dune nourishment like this, the project should be able to qualify for FEMA's public assistance program, where FEMA comes in and basically awards funds to communities to repair storm damaged beaches and dunes. So I think this is an exciting possibility to generate additional revenue. The system has some drawbacks. It encompasses more risk in the sense that sand is not a fixed and firm protection. So you have a risk of erosion in storms larger than the 100-year event. I think probably the adaptive management scheme would require larger annual sand placements, because rather than having a fixed structure, you have sand that's free to move in the system. At any rate, I thank you for your time. I'd encourage the commission and maybe all parties to consider this proposed alternative as a potential pathway to balance the many competing interests here. I don't think this has been explored sufficiently, and I would be anxious to explore it with you in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kriebel. I have a question if no members of the commission have a question? And so I read that with a great deal of interest, as I hope the applicants and members of the town administration did. But in terms of this application, your letter of November 28th, 2022, geotube encroachment on the public beach, and your letter of February 15th, 2024, what to expect from the proposed expansion project as an addendum to a geotube encroachment on the public beach. Do you have anything to add to that? Or I just wanted to ask you if you would clarify the comments you made on February 22nd, 2024, when you were before us, roughly 2 hours into our meeting. When you said sand has to be available for a storm, the implication being that there wasn't enough sand on the face of the current design of the geotubes.
Mm-hmm.
Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. So my point there is that, as a storm is occurring, waves have a sort of a demand for sand. And waves are going to move sand. They're going to try to move sand. And if you lock up all the sand behind a fixed structure, that imparts changes to the whole littoral system. Whereas having something like this sand berm provides a free flow of sand so that you can get something much closer to a natural longshore sediment transport condition that would occur there. So, I think my point was that at least, as far as adaptive management, I do not think it's appropriate for the geotubes because they are exposed at precisely the time where you need to add sand into the system. And with adaptive management, you can't add it then. You have to add it sometime later. Whereas I think with something like the sand berm, the sand is available at the very instant that the storm is occurring and when it's needed the most. So that's an advantage I see here.
Thank you, sir. I noticed that Commissioner Engelborg has his hand up. Seth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is an appropriate time to discuss my comment about our alternatives analyses. So in the original submission by SPPF, which is over 350 pages, the alternatives considered section, which is section 5.0, is only 1 1/4 page. And I'll note that in this submission, some of the alternatives don't really have a lot of detail to them. They don't really talk about the theoretical feasibility of them. They just say things like past proposals on this type of alternative were withdrawn or not approved. So I don't think that's necessarily a robust enough alternative analysis. I think alternatives like the one proposed by Dr. Kriebel today are certainly intriguing and could be a good protection for the system that balances all interests. So I think that the applicant should go back and consider some of these alternatives. I'll also note that in the Arcadis report that's been highly quoted by this application and the applicants, there was a more robust set of alternatives that was in that report, and not even all of those got into the notice of intent. Some of them are probably technically more difficult, like offshore breakwaters, but there's no discussion of the feasibility or the installation of those. So I'd request that the applicant do its due diligence and go back and really give us a robust alternatives analysis, because that is required for our process. I also mentioned too, while we're on the Sandcoar berm idea, I raised this in another hearing, but for this hearing, it's my personal belief that Coar envelopes would be considered a engineering structure under our local regulations. I know that that question hasn't been definitively answered one way or the other. That being said, this is such a complex project with many stakeholders and many competing interests that it is our job here to balance all of those interests. And we can't, you can't sacrifice one interest at the sake of another interest. But if you think about theoretically, or not theoretically, if you think about essentially what the function of a coastal bank is, as outlined in the Wetlands Protection Act and in the Nantucket Wetlands Regulations, the really important performance standards that are being talked about, or the really important functions of those of that resource area, is to provide storm damage prevention and erosion prevention. And because of the scope of this project and the amount of data we have in this project, which is probably more than any other project in the Commonwealth, and because the amount of complex interwoven planning processes that exist, like the alternative access, like the other projects south of this proposal that already exist on the beach, I think that we would probably be benefited by doing something that is more of a short to midterm installation, like the Sandcoar berm that Dr. Kriebel is proposing, because of the timeline that's expected by our permitting process. So when we get an application for a coastal engineering structure, that application is for 3 years or potentially 6 years if extended. It's not meant to be a permanent application. Sometimes these projects last for much longer than that permitting process because they receive certificates of compliance and are allowed to continue. But given all of the interwoven pieces that we have going on in this road, I think it would make sense to try something less permanent that meets all of the performance standards of the coastal bank and coastal beach and all the other resource areas that we're protecting, potentially like this Sandcoar berm or something else that is permittable. So, we've been stuck at crossroads for so long, and I know I've probably been a big factor in that, but I think we do need to focus on our regulatory duty to try to get something permitted here so that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And I certainly, personally, I don't consider you a major roadblock. I consider your comments extremely helpful. So, Joe? You're muted, Joe.
How's that?
That's good.
A question for Dr. Kreibel, if I may. A month ago in Salisbury, Massachusetts, there was a sand dune that was designed to protect coastal homes, washed away in 3 days, cost $500,000 to install. Is there anything that we can learn from that experience?
Dr. Peeble, are you still on the call?
I am. Oh, there I go. I have to raise my hand, but
Thank you.
yes, Commissioner. Yeah, that's an interesting case. And from what I've been able to tell, looking at it, they provided much less sand over a much longer area. So they had a very small density of sand in place, far, far less than what this sand berm would call for. So, I think that's the first point. Second point is that is certainly a risk of all systems like this. It's a risk of all beach nourishment that's used in the U.S., and that is that storms are going to occur. We can't control when they occur. We have to be able to be resilient enough to let them occur and then rebuild as necessary. That will be part of what has to be into this plan if we go with something like this sand berm. And of course, that would, in part would happen anyway with the geotubes because a storm of sufficient size would remove, so much of the sand from in front there as well. But, back to Salisbury, I can look at the details some more. But again, my first inclination is that it just was not a very large sand density in place.
I do have a follow-on question, if I may.
Please. And
And-
can I just ask, Joe,
Yes.
Dr. Peeble, if you know that they had choir rolls behind the sand there in Salisbury? Because I didn't see any evidence of it when I looked at it superficially.
I do not know, and I also did not see any evidence of that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Joe. Forgive me for interrupting.
Not a problem. We talk about sand. We talk a lot about sand. Dr. Kreibel, did you read the article in Scientific American in February about sand?
I don't believe so.
You would find that very interesting. It's about 5 pages long. It's a lengthy article, and it talks about the issue of trying to get sand for a lot of different projects and what's happening with the increase in volume and the increase in prices and it makes for a very interesting article.
Yes, so I think I did skim part of that, and it's certainly an issue that's going on in a lot of places, and that is what the sand supply is, and so that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. To my knowledge, that hasn't been addressed in the geotube expansion project either, and that would, as I mentioned, that would require, I think, more than twice as much sand as what this sand berm would call for. So certainly the sand supply is a big issue that should be addressed.
And if I may, with one more question,
Of course, Joe.
and guess what? I forgot it. I don't
That's
see
all
it in
right.
my notes.
That's okay. So
I'll
Seth.
come
has his hand up.
back on it.
Okay, Seth has his hand up. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly on the Salisbury case, and I believe some of the other members or other people on this call might have more information, but I'll note in that case, although what Joe is saying is true and that it was a significant financial loss and a significant sand source loss, that the installation did actually do its job to protect erosion. And as Dr. Kriebel mentions here, there is possibilities if we were to use a similar alternative in this location on Nantucket, that there could be intense storms that wiped much of that sand off of that installation. But then sand would be re-added as part of the adaptive management. I've said this before in other permitting processes, but finances are not really a topic of discussion for the Conservation Commission. That's more of a applicant or a town select board type discussion. Our discussion is strictly on the environmental aspects of the project. So if there's a alternative that can proceed, but it might end up being more costly than a different alternative that is not permittable, that's sort of the decision for the applicant, but we can't rush to permit something just because it's financially cheaper than something else. So thank you.
Joe, did you remember what you wanted to ask?
I found it in my notes, yes. what I didn't see much of, Dr. Kreibel, is this issue of sea level rise and how that would impact whether it was core or whether it was geotubes. Won't that have for example, if the sea level was a foot higher than it is now, wouldn't that have an impact on those methods of protecting the bluff?
Yes, it would. And that certainly is a factor. And I think, it certainly played into Arcadis's final recommendation that with future sea level rise, you eventually may get to a point where the situation is untenable, regardless of what you do, and you have to retreat. It's interesting that if you look at tide data, much of the U.S. East Coast has had a relatively steep rise in sea level just in the last few years. And I think it's a factor that might be at play in some of the recent storm events, that the sea levels have been a little bit higher recently. Excuse me, mean sea level has been a little bit higher on the East Coast recently. So as a result, storms have been able to reach a little higher and do a little more damage. But yes, it is certainly a factor.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Tim.
Yes, I think this Dr. Kriebel's idea is definitely worth considering. My question would be, I assume that the purpose of the geotubes is to protect the bottom of the bluff when the sand washes away. Is there a significantly greater risk of a storm damaging the bluff without the geotubes in the sand only scenario? And at the right time, I'd like to hear opinions from Dr. Kriebel, excuse me, and Dr. Dunk on this. Thank you.
Dr. Kriebel?
Well, see if I can, there we go. The issue is, and I'm sorry, I'm just having a momentary again, your question, if you don't mind. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's how important, how much more protected is the bluff with the geotubes there in a large storm than if it's just sand?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, certainly, it's certainly more protected. There's no doubt having, this large coastal engineering structure there would provide a greater level of protection. What can be analyzed is, and I have not done this, is to run an erosion model to look at how fast the erosion occurs in the 100-year storm, and to what extent it would cut back the sand berm, and at some point then expose the Coyer terrace. I have also not, really designed the Coyer terrace. I showed in my diagram maybe 4 levels. Wouldn't have to be limited to that. So I think there could be some design work there to provide increased protection with that, either going a little bit higher or, putting a second layer in front or something. So there are other design options that could be worked to provide greater protection.
Thanks, sir.
If it helps, Mr. Chair, I've been keeping a list. The next non-commissioner hand that was up is Frank Weimar.
But I think, does Dwight not have a hand up, which and thank you, Jeff, but if Dwight has a question for Dr. Kriebel or an observation. And you're muted, Dwight.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate Commissioner Brain, bringing that point up and asking for comment from both Dr. Kriebel and myself. We've had a chance to take a look at Dr. Kriebel's letter, and we will provide a more robust written response. But just a brief response to this alternative, and in response to Commissioner Brain's comment there. First of all, the quote-unquote 540 rule that is identified by FEMA has been superseded by guidance from FEMA in their coastal construction manual dated 2011. And that FEMA now recommends a fronting dune reservoir of 1,100 square feet rather than 540 square feet. And that is based on observations, observations by FEMA during various storms. So they've increased it to 1,100 square feet. And in Massachusetts, the CZM and DEP have adopted the 1,100 square feet. As you know, have adopted that as the cross-sectional area because that's what's needed to prevent a complete blowout of the dune during the 1% or 100-year flooding event. And that's identified in their 2017 manual. And that manual even notes that even at 1,100 square feet, those dunes may still be lost during a large storm event. As noted, Arcadis has looked at this alternative and determined that it was not feasible for the midterm or short term. The Coyer Terraces, as we've noted with the most recent storms and the request for the emergency certifications and the notice of intent, haven't been effective for intense storms along the shoreline. And if we look at the 1,100 square feet, that's a much larger cross-sectional area than has been identified here. And the Beach Nourishment Project, which is identified in the alternatives analysis back from 06, 07, was rejected partly due to the sand coming off of the bluff, coming off of the beach, and covering the cobble habitat. So with that, we just wanted to respond to those comments. And the geotubes, in terms of the last question from Commissioner Brain, was that the geotubes do provide a stopgap or a fail-safe when all of that sand is washed away to prevent the waves from interacting into the bluff, especially where it's steep and causing bluff erosion.
Thank you, Dwight. And if may I observe that the amount of sand available on the front of the geotubes is absolutely a small fraction of what CZM and FEMA are now suggesting for the alternative. I mean, literally, I would say it's like 5%. So anyway, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Golding. I guess my thoughts are that I too was disappointed about there was a lack of alternative options in the original NOI. And this Quarrel has a very interesting idea that I think we should pursue some more. There's one issue of it that I particularly want to look at is the putting sand on top of the geotubes has been, we've had to be the sand police, and with varying success of making sure sand was on the geotubes, and sometimes the sand wasn't on the tubes. And the downdrift properties pay the price for that. With the quarrels, they are designed to lose the sand in major storms, and to me, the homeowners will be much more incentivized to make sure the sand is there, because without the sand, the quarrels by themselves will fail, and then the bluff will erode, and we have the unplanned disaster. So I like that aspect of it, and I think we should ask the applicant to provide us a very complete analysis of the quarrels as one of the alternatives to this project, and any others they can think of. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical that the choir role, I mean, I see Mark's point and I accept Seth's recommendation for the robust alternatives, but the open wave action there just seems like it would be very harsh on the choir rolls. And just one other thought, Salisbury, Mass is a mainland location in terms of getting sand delivery, as we are not. So, I guess I'd be a little worried about the vulnerability that we could have in between storms if we couldn't get sand delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. But there's 22 cubic yards per linear foot on top of them, which is available to the storm before the choir is exposed. So I look at it slightly differently from the way you do. And but I think it's a really interesting alternative to be pursued. But that's my take on it. Yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just point out quickly that what Mr. Mizzarelli is calling my recommendation for an alternatives is actually required by our local regulation. So in the performance standard for Coastal Bank, the applicants are required to submit an alternatives analysis that looks at environmentally better ways to control erosion problems. That is required by the applicant. And I understand I have submitted one, but if you look at it in comparison to the types of robust alternatives that we get for other projects, we get one projects that have 20 pages of alternatives analyzed. This is a 4,000 linear foot project with 1.25 page. So I would request that real robust analysis be done. I also agree with Mark, Beal, and some other people who have commented that the COBAR envelope does incentivize homeowners to be more active in the maintenance. And I think that's a good thing for this area. If there is a lack of sand in front of geotubes, you still have coastal protection because those geotubes are acting as a hard armoring structure. And there's not necessarily an incentive to have sand out in front of there other than it's legally required by the order of conditions. But if you have a softer installation like Kawar, it's either you're keeping up with the maintenance or your property is experiencing the negatives from that. So if we want to be if you want to talk about a good public-private partnership where people are invested in the community and invested in what's actually happening in this area, we should be permitting things that, people are more active in the maintenance of. I would just say too, I don't think the assumption that geotubes provide a better or more robust protection than COAR rolls, that's just fact. I mean, that's factually true. But the reality is, there's a whole suite of coastal protection measures that exist. If you wanted the most robust thing on earth, you could build a long, tall seawall. But we've shown in this area that is not permittable and it has environmental drawbacks. So it's our job to distill the applications into getting an alternative permitted that is balancing all performance standards of all protected areas and not sacrificing some areas at the sake of others. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And to build on your comment, for the last two major storms, there's been no sand at all in front of the geotubes. And Jeff, I think I'm correct in saying it's been, over 6 months now? I'm sort of losing track. It is.
There's been
right?
sand in and out of there even recently, but it's not, I wouldn't say that the yearly nourishment volumes in the sand year are there. I'd have to do the math on it a bit and get everyone those dates. But they have been out working on the structure even in the last couple of months.
Tim?
Yes, a question again, I guess for Dr. Kriebel. One of his comments is that the geotubes are much harder to remove. And I wanted to get an explanation of that. What makes it more difficult and sort of how it's done.
Dr. Kriebel?
Okay. I think there we go. Still working. Yeah, I think what partially is observational that despite the removal order, the geotubes haven't been removed. That's probably for many reasons, but as we saw, it took a major engineering study and some time to come up with a plan to remove them. In contrast, I think we've seen with the coir bags that if they split open, they do need to be removed, but they're much smaller and much easier to remove than the geotubes.
Seth?
Thank you. I'd just like to add some observations as well, in that in the original permitting process for the current geotubes that exist on site, one of the representatives for the applicant at the time indicated that it would be a very easy process to remove the geotubes. You can just basically cut them open with a knife and take them out. And we've learned, empirically over the last few years here, that is not true either from a legal perspective or from an engineering perspective. In the removal plan that SPPF has submitted for the pilot project that is completely engineered at this point, there's a robust construction protocol with heavy machinery. So it is just factually true that it's harder to remove them based on the type of alternative that is being used.
Thank you, Seth. Mark?
Yes, thank you. Just to build on that thought, we have had an estimate that it's going to cost $450,000 to remove the 970 feet that are there now. And we hope we have that money in hand. I think if we get proceeding on the geotubes, it'll be 450 times a factor of 3 or 4 for bonding issue, and not accounting for inflation. So I'm not sure I mentioned that at the last hearing, I believe, but I mean, this is going to be a major bonding issue for the applicant, and I suppose the town, to have to put money aside, or a bond aside, that will assure us that if things go south, we can remove the geotubes with the bond money. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. So unless there are further questions from commissioners, Dr. Kriebel, thank you very much for your time this evening. And I'm going to go to Frank Waymar.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I see, and I guess I'm not on camera. Well, I want to start, I think, with a slightly different flavor than what you've been going through, and I definitely want to honor your time commitment. But I just want to mention that my wife has been coming to Nantucket for 87 years, and I have become every year since our honeymoon in 58. And we've been in our home on the bluff for 50 years. And our 9 grandchildren have spent every single summer of their lives in our home on the bluff in Sconset. So we are deeply emotionally and intellectually, and whatever other version of attachment there is, attached to that, our second home, if you will, and have been on this case. I was involved in 1989 in getting with others in getting SBPF underway. So been involved on this question for a while. And I didn't just, it's obvious, but I want to just emphasize, it's been the backdrop to this whole conversation. The sea level is rising. Thank you very much. Storms, climate issues are with us. Storms are getting necessarily more intense as we go through time. It is not only Baxter Road in our home that is threatened on the eastern shore of Nantucket. It's ultimately, and this is key in the backdrop to this whole discussion, it's ultimately Sconset Village and all of Sconset. And then, of course, the rest of the island along the shoreline as well, that accounts for a great deal of Nantucket's historic, I mean, whether it's current day or historic, extraordinarily important community and history and architecture, etc. So it's a major island-wide issue, and it's a major Sconset-wide issue longer term. And to address this as a just a problem for the next 10 years or, on a 10-year solution doesn't really make any sense. And that goes to the issue, I think, of QUAR, which we have been spending a lot of time and effort and money on for multiple years now, so more than a decade. QUAR versus geotubes. The QUAR is great as long as it lasts and as long as you don't get 2 significant storms, or to say nothing of 3 significant storms, reasonably back to back, because it definitely takes time to respond to the destroyed QUAR tubes, get new tubes into place, get new covering sand into place. And if you don't do it, and you, in many instances, you simply can't do it, you're way more vulnerable to the second storm than you were to the first storm, obviously. And that is simply not true with the geotubes. We now have remarkable over a decade experience with the geotubes. And yes, the sand, and the design of that system is to supply the same amount of sand per annum over the long term as the eroding bank would, in order to have neighboring beaches not be negatively impacted by this protection. And we've been doing that. I have to say we have stopped from time a couple of times because it looked like we were being abandoned. But we're clearly committed to doing that long term. Have a bond in place that guarantees it. Have proposed that for any extension then necessary, bonding would be in place that would guarantee the continuous supply of sand. But the key again is that if with back-to-back storms, we've got full protection. The back-to-back dunes, no. You don't get the sand that got wiped out in a week or 4 days. You don't get that back in place in a day or two. You don't even get it back in place in a week or two. And then another significant storm comes along and you're totally exposed. So none of that has happened where the geotubes have been installed. They've worked perfectly. And the procedures can be obviously put in place and enforced and financed to make sure that the adequate sand is supplied that would mimic the eroding bank, which is the key.
Thank you.
So that's basically it. I would just say again that there's no comparison in terms of effectiveness of long-term protection between the QUAR that is being argued, or much less sand dunes, and the geotextile tubes.
So So I thank you very much. And you and I have known each other for what, 35 years or so. I remember
Yes,
teaching my parents about the dewatering system. So I remember, you know, you've taken a positive interest for a long time. And so I normally think of you as Helmut, not Frank.
I am Helmut, actually. But that goes to an argument between my parents.
Okay.
My father
right.
liked Frank and he went to work. My mother liked Helmut and she stayed at home.
Well, my best to your wife.
Thank you.
Carol Greenberg, thank you for your patience, and please identify yourself for the record and
Okay,
have
thank
at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I'm Carol Greenberg. I'm president of the Sconset Civic Association. I am here to ask you to please consider the application to expand the GEO2 project. Nantucket, as you all know, is a popular destination, and Sconset, I would say, on most visitors' must-do list when they first arrive. Visiting the village of Sconset, walking the bluff path, Baxter Road to the iconic Sankaty Lighthouse is a highlight of everyone's visit. We have physically counted between 500 and 600 visitors a day walking the bluff path on any given day during July and August. These visitors enjoy the scenic views of the Atlantic, the historic homes until they reach the lighthouse, and then back again to enjoy an ice cream or sandwich at the market, Claudette's, or the very popular Sconset bookstore. I would think by preventing this project to move forward in time will affect those employees who work day and night in the Sconset marketplace. Over the 10+ years that the geotubes have been in place, there has been positive protection. The surveys show that only around 4-ish people per week walk the beach below in the summer months. How do we compare this to the hundreds and hundreds of visitors who use and enjoy Baxter Road? In my mind, we have nothing to lose by going forward with this project, but so much to gain. The Sconset Civic Association has over 500 members, and I invite this commission to join us at one of our member meetings this July or August. As a matter of fact, Mr. Carlson has been a special guest speaker not too long ago. Thank you for your time and energy that you have given to this very complex issue and to Sconset and, of course, Baxter Road. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Greenberg. Spruce.
Sorry about that, Chairman. I was trying to unmute. I have a couple of things I want to talk about.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, sorry, Burton Ballkind, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Nantucket Conservation. Coastal Conservancy. What I'd like to talk about a couple of things. First thing is sometimes you have to go back a little bit in the past to see the future, and I want to talk about the actual template and the 22 cubic yards per linear foot that's on there. It's a great number and it's been bantered around a lot. But the reality is, and I have submitted as chairman, you know, and as staff, and I hope most of the members of the commission have seen the drone shots I've sent over the course of years, and specifically since November of last year, of 23, I've been droning at least once a month and sending the drone photography in, and I can say that the toe of the geotubes has had no sand in it 99% of the time. I think there was one time that sand was pushed off when they were when they had put some sand on top of the template, it was pushed off and it was gone within a week. And I haven't seen any sand at the toe. So that's almost 6 months, as you stated earlier, Chairman. And the other thing is that sand has actually been taken off of the template and moved over to the core roll, which it still hasn't been addressed. I'm not going to bring that up here, but I just did want to mention that too. So, you know, if any future conditioning, if you're going to condition the NOI, I would implore you to have some component in there of a more robust monitoring system and a better plan for putting sand down in front of, even before the removal order. I have droned and taken regular photography of the geotubes that were didn't have any mitigation sand in front of it for that long stretches of time, more than the month that's allowed. It's the reason why it was permitted, to my understanding, one of the reasons why this geotube project was permitted is because it had a mitigation sand component to it. And that kind of alleviated the coastal engineering structure concerns that were well-founded and have proved, in my opinion, to show that beaches, not only in front, but on either side of it, have been affected. I'll just say that. So again, I'm going to ask the commission, if you do permit this NOI, please have a very robust monitoring and some kind of action plan to put sand on there, because it's a wall if there's no sand in front of it. And that's not fair to the adjacent beaches, to the beach in front, and really to the people of Nantucket, because it's our beach. It's the town of Nantucket's beach that this project is on. Okay, so that's that. And the other thing is, I wanted to introduce a gentleman who is information about photogrammetry was sent to you February 16th in a letter from the Coastal Conservancy. His name is Jacob Tinkhauser, and I think he's on the call. If he is, after I'm done talking, I would like him to get up. If you have any questions, I'd like he could address them. But he's the president of Farfetch Nantucket LLC, and he and I worked with the Worcester Polytech team as volunteers, doing drone and photogrammetry imaging that can be used for a variety of purposes. In this case, it was used to monitor coastal changes through a collection of comprehensive and detailed data that Jacob collected. He has and I think most of you have probably seen that. And so if you have any questions, if he's on the call, I'm gonna hand the mic to him, so to speak. I'm gonna thank you all for your time. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Spruce. Is your specialist, your friend, available? I have the letter along with the imagery in front of me.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. This is
Jacob Tinkhauser.
Hi.
Hi. Please identify yourself and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This is Jacob Tinkhauser. I am a year-round Nantucket resident. I am the president of Farfetch Nantucket, and I offer 2D and 3D drone mapping and modeling services on Nantucket. I have worked with the Coastal Conservancy on getting some more up-to-date images and maps of the bluff in its kind of current state. And Doug Rose has used those for a number of presentations, diagrams detailing this. Happy to answer any questions about the images. Thank you for your time.
Yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Spruce and Jacob for presenting. So for those of you who don't know, I am a FAA certified remote pilot that has carried out also many different missions on Nantucket for photogrammetry. The focus of my master's degree at UMass Amherst was on aerial surveying for aquatic plants using drone footage and photogrammetry. I think I'm pretty knowledgeable in this area. I'll note that Airshark, which is the company that produced the LiDAR imagery for the applicant, was at the time a startup company that was in great competition with my lab group at UMass Amherst, which eventually turned into UMass Air, but I guess that's not important for this discussion. I'll note for the sake of the record that photogrammetry and LiDAR data are different, and I'll ask Jacob to talk about those differences. I'll note also that the LiDAR that was used is from 2021. So if we want a current analysis of the volumetric calculations of Sconset Bluff and of the position of Sconset Bluff, we should require the applicant to provide that with the updated aerial survey. Jacob, do you want to talk a little bit about photogrammetry versus LiDAR?
Sure.
I can as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I understood today's meeting was to be discussing having questions for the applicant. So I'm not sure if this is it's very helpful to know the limits and qualities of the photographic information we're about to get, but are we off topic at all?
Well, Mark, so I have the letter that the Coastal Conservancy presented on February the 16th, 2024, with the imaging data, which Doug Rose also used. And so it's very high def. Of course, you can't see it because I have a virtual background. But so if you don't mind, if you could explain briefly the difference and why they chose these images, I think it has relevance to what they wrote 2 months ago. If you would humor me, and thank you.
Just for quick clarification, Mr. Chair, too, applicants are required to use recent data and up-to-date data to support their application. So that's the purpose of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying why you asked, Seth. Jacob, would you share your knowledge with us?
Sure. So I was engaged by the Coastal Conservancy to provide an aerial map of the Baxter Road Bluff. And this is a 2D map, kind of straight down looking at the bluff. And the images were then orthorectified, which allows measurements to be taken from the images and to see how much the bank has retreated from the previous images that were supplied in the NOI. This photogrammetry versus LiDAR was not something that I was engaged to do, but the difference between photogrammetry and LiDAR is that LiDAR is using a laser to bounce it. The camera has a laser on it. It sends the laser out and it looks for the reflection back, and it can figure out the distances based on the time for the laser to reflect back. Photogrammetry is not using a laser, it's using a camera, and it's using multiple images taken at different angles to figure out to make a 3D model from these differences in perspective. They both provide 3D models. They are both accurate, depending on, for photogrammetry, the higher the resolution of the photos, the more accuracy is obtained, and LiDAR depends on the specifications of the LiDAR instrument. LiDAR is more expensive. LiDAR is typically better if you have a forested area where this is totally exposed, so LiDAR isn't necessary here. Those are the main differences.
Thank you for your explanation. And so no further questions from commissioners. I see that Trey Rothman, you've had your hand up for some time. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioner or Chairman. I just wanted to quickly
Commissioner's
fill in
fine.
a couple of gaps on what was talked about earlier. I'm here representing the Nantucket Land Council. So the questions came up about the Salisbury Nourishment Project. That project was designed as an emergency measure. It used 16,000 tons of sediment, which equates to roughly 12,800 cubic yards of sediment. It was spread over 1.6 miles, which equates to 1.5 cubic yards per linear foot. As an emergency nourishment, it was designed to protect the houses and the buildings along that stretch of beach. And I can say it did work as designed because no buildings were lost. So the volume that we were talking about there relative to what we're talking about in Sconset is obviously much smaller. And again, the nourishment was designed in a way to do what it needed to. I think the news grabbed onto it because of the costs involved placing sand over such a long stretch of coastline. And that it was damaged, but it was damaged as designed. I also wanted to quickly bring up the point that Dr. Dunk raised relative to the 1,100 square feet. FEMA has added 1,100 square feet to its mapping guidelines. They did that because the 540 rule does not account for long-term erosion. It was formulated to determine what would be required by a dune to survive a 100-year storm. The update to 1,100 square feet also addresses what happens if multiple storms occur. And the reason this is important for FEMA is that they are mapping geographically where flood insurance zones are. So they're not designing dunes to offer storm protection. They're looking at these rules as how to determine where flood zones lay after they produce a map, which lasts for up to decades before they get updated. So using that as guidance to say the 540 square rule, which has been designed and formulated to last a 100-year storm, is incorrect, isn't really capturing all the details of what should be talked about.
Thank you, Trey. Do you have anything else that you wish to add or regarding?
No, Dr. Kriebel covered all of our points on ways we thought there would be a suitable way for the commission to consider an alternative to the geotubes to get Baxter Road through the kind of short-term period before it can be relocated.
Thank you, Trey.
Thank you.
Linda?
I think we're way off topic. I was hoping this would just be public comment. We listened to that, this particular saying we're way out of where I thought we were going to go, but that's my opinion. I am not convinced of this dune issue. I'm not going to discuss emergency solutions, short-term solutions. We need to be talking about longer-term solutions. The geotube, in my opinion, has been a longer-term solution that has functioned well, regardless of the issues we have with how much nourishment, sand nourishment we have. We cannot go at this as like, oh, we can handle a couple of storms, then we're screwed again. This has to be a discussion about long-term protection that the town can rely on being there while they work through the rest of this issue with the relocation of the roads, et cetera, et cetera. I keep hearing this word emergency, short term, 1 or 2 storms. I'm not going there personally. So I'm not hearing what I need to hear today.
Thank you, Linda. So from my perspective, this is part of gathering information to see whether or not we can permit this in a way that is consistent with our duties under both the state and local regulations. So, Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just caught one little bit from Mr. Ruthven's comments on Salisbury, and Mr. Ruthven, you can answer it or whoever is appropriate on the call, but you mentioned that they took sediment. Did they take the sediment and pile it up on the beach as the emergency measure? Am I understanding that correctly, or did I hear that wrong? Thank you.
So yes, they trucked in sediment or sand and placed it in a modified, a small template, so a dune template to protect the homes over that 1.6 mile stretch. So it had a forest slope. I think it was 1-on-3, up a flat berm and then down. But at 1.6 cubic yards per linear foot, that's a really, or 1.5 cubic yards per linear foot. That's a really small berm. So when we're talking about a berm of over 22 cubic yards at the base of sconset versus 1.5, it's a drastically different profile of what you're seeing. It is really just a few feet high, really meant to deal with the uprush of waves during a storm.
Okay, just for my clarification, and forgive me for being a little dense, but they trucked in sand. It wasn't sediment like that. They sucked off the. I saw something recently in Long Island where they pumped a slurry from the water, piled it on the beach, and bulldozed it all over the place. That's not what they did in Salisbury. They trucked the sand in.
That's correct. What you're seeing in Long Island is offshore sand mining. They can also do that if they're cleaning out inlets, and you can pump the sand onto the beach, dewater it, and then actually use bulldozers to put it in place to form a beach nourishment template or a dune template. In New York, New Jersey, they do a lot of offshore sand mining. Currently in Massachusetts, it's not allowed.
Yeah, so that's just out of the question in Massachusetts. Okay, thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
So I have on my window, I have 22 of the 39 people who are actually watching or participating. So I apologize if there's anyone who has their hand up that I can't see, but Deanne, I thought I saw your hand. So excellent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you for recognizing me. This has been a very informative discussion.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
Certainly, I'm Deanne Atherton, and I'm the administrative coordinator for the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. And our mission is to preserve and protect Nantucket's coastal resources. And our focus is where it has always been, and that's on the public beach below the bluff. Quite frankly, I think if the beach were not owned by the inhabitants of Nantucket, I don't know that we would be as engaged in this issue. And that relates to my comment, and I'm hoping Dr. Kriebel is here and he might comment. There are a number of proponents of the geotubes who have spoken very articulately and very compellingly about the fact that the geotubes are working. But what they are not understanding is that the fact is the geotubes are having an adverse impact on the beach seaward of them. And that beach, our beach, is being degraded, diminished, and will eventually disappear. They perhaps did not hear Dr. Kriebel's testimony from 1 or 2 meetings ago, and I would ask him to just comment for the record because facts really matter. And that is if he could just say very succinctly, what is the impact that the geotubes are having on the public beach in front of them, seaward of them? Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Dr. Kriebel, are you still on this? Excellent. Thank you. Would you like to respond to Deanne? I saw his hand go up briefly.
There we go. Perhaps that work?
Yep.
Yes. So as Deanne just mentioned, I've tried to write in some previous submissions about what I call the encroachment of the geotubes on the beach. And it's something which we call passive erosion effects, where we have an eroding beach and we have a fixed structure, in this case, the geotubes, and eventually the two collide. And eventually the end product is no beach in front of that fixed structure. And that's the situation that I believe we are in now, with the exposed geotubes getting exposed, even before the sand placements were halted, they were still getting exposed very frequently. So I think we're in that kind of a situation. We certainly know that structures like the geotubes have negative effects on adjacent beaches. And I think as I reviewed some of the drone images that Mr. Balkind has provided, it seems clear to me that just in the storm of even last week or so, certainly the storms this winter, that the presence of the geotubes and the lack of maintenance, the lack of mitigation sand in the system is having an effect immediately on properties immediately adjacent to it. And you can see the scalloping out of the bluff region immediately adjacent to it. And then we have longer reach. Structures like this can affect shorelines quite a far distance down the coast. And that's an issue we've of course been concerned about, the lack of mitigation sand in a cumulative sense, just not keeping up with the demand of the system. So at any rate, I think I'm not sure, Deanna, if that addresses all your questions specifically, but I think there are impacts immediately in front of the geotubes. There are impacts immediately adjacent to them. And I believe when I look at the data, there's impacts much farther afield.
Thank you, Dr. Kriebel. Jeff, could you put on the screen share the photograph that Burton Balkind is on April the 10th? It is part of the package to demonstrate that.
Hey,
Please.
you just got to give me 1 second to pull it up.
And I have to say that when I was out there during the storm, and the reflection of the waves hitting the bare geotubes was extraordinary, the way that it was reflected back and creating waves that were, I don't know, 10 feet high or more. And I think I posted one of them at our meeting last Thursday. I think it was shown. So, I mean, it's clearly the reflective power of a naked geotube is very similar to basically a stone revetment. So, yes, Seth. Oh, I beg your pardon. Dr. Kriebel, do you have anything additional to say?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yes, Seth?
Thank you. I'd just like to add for the record that I was hoping at some point we would talk about adverse impacts, because it hasn't really been a conversation of tonight's hearing or many of the hearings. And I know we're discussing a notice of intent for a different project, but since we have the current GO2 pilot project in place to look for, I understand that over the years, the applicants' representatives have made statements that, they don't believe that there's adverse impacts. And we've also had statements from professionals, from the public, and from our own independent review, or in the past, Greg Berman, that there are adverse impacts. Also, there's been a huge amount of testimony about the likelihood of additional impacts should the geotubes remain uncovered. And I hope we can get that photo up, but I think it is clear to everybody that without the mitigation sand in front of geotubes, they absolutely cause a starvation of sand to the littoral system, and if uncovered for too long, will disrupt the longshore sediment transport and cause impacts to adjacent beaches. And that's on top of all the encroachment and passive erosion issues that have been talked about already. But it's important that if we do move forward with a geotube alternative, that we have extremely well thought out and very enforceable actions to ensure that sand is there when it's at all times when it's needed. And we need a lot more detail and a lot more data from the applicant about how they are going to do that, because what's in the notice of intent right now related to sand sourcing is, in my opinion, relatively vague. So, you know, if we do go down that road, I think we have an incomplete application related to sand sourcing. Thank you.
I do have that photo if you guys want that now. Sorry to put in.
Thanks, Jeff. It's in the, excellent. Thank you.
So it is part of the packet too. It's in the latest round with the bird of all kind submission from 410.
Right. So. Great, thanks, Jeff.
No problem.
So any additional comments or from members of the public, or anything that commissioners would like to say? And Seth, I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said in terms of adverse impacts is something that we need to go into in great depth. And you put your hand up again?
Yeah, just quickly, and this might come up in the other items on the agenda, but I'd also ask for an update from the applicant's representative or from our staff as to some indication of when the last monitoring reports were submitted for the pilot project, because it's important to know that if applicants or members of the public are making claims of no adverse impact based on monitoring periods that don't exist, that shouldn't really be held as accurate. We have to have the data to show that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments on adverse impacts. I just would like to close out my comments to say a project of this nature, adverse impacts are going to rear their ugly head somewhere, and I just hope we can find the best alternative that there is palatable, whether it's going to be downdrift beaches, end scour, the roads. It's going to happen somewhere, or total loss altogether. So we'll continue the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Nyland, good afternoon. I guess it's good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. When we spoke last at the last meeting in terms of the format tonight, I understood that this was going to be all public comment. You've been very generous in allowing the applicant to make several presentations without interruption. So with the exception of a question posed to Dr. Dunk by one of the members, we've remained quiet here.
Do you mind identifying yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Not at all.
Chip Nyland, Richard Chip Nyland, representing SBPF with respect to this notice of intent. So I'm sorry, as I indicated, you had been very generous to the applicant for the last several presentations. So we did attempt to remain mute here. You did say that we could, offer a small response at the conclusion. So I just wanted to make sure that you didn't end all the public comment without us having a chance to respond at some point. So when that ends, we would like to just speak for a couple of minutes.
Well, I think you have the stage, sir.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would say that tonight was a very helpful discussion, because I think it frames the issue in terms of what is the responsibility of the Conservation Commission. As you know, I've told you that I sat on my commission for 9 years. I'm also up on the North Shore, so I've watched what's been happening up in Salisbury, and I agree with the general description of what took place with that sacrificial dune. I would remind you, though, that that's dune and dune, and what we have here is a far different question, because we obviously have a coastal bank with dune as opposed to dune and dune. The one thing that I think that that the commission has talked about is the alternatives analysis. And what happened here after the removal order was issued and there was a stop to the work that was taking place, including recovering sand on top of the geotubes, is that the path we were going down was we were going to remove the geotubes. And then a group got together, including Arcadis on behalf of the town, to look at whether or not there was an alternative in order to protecting that in order to protect that bluff. And I think, we believe, if we believed that the Quar Log Terrace was an appropriate alternative, we would have grabbed onto that a long time ago. When you're looking at an alternatives analysis, what you look at is the logistics, but you also look at what the project purpose is. And I do commend Dr. Kriebel, because he does acknowledge in his report that it has a potential to provide protection to the bluff from erosion during the 100-year storm. I think that that's what the key is. Our project purpose is to protect that bluff. It's not to have the potential to protect the bluff, or we hope it will protect the bluff, or we're only going to protect the bluff for 3 years until everything goes away and we have a retreat package. So, when we're doing an alternatives analysis, we're going to look at that project purpose. And that's why we discarded the Quar Log Terrace as a permanent solution here. You heard very compelling comment from public members who have experience with Quar Logs, and Dr. Kriebel admitted that the geotube was more protective of the coastal bluff. So we will take you up on your request that we embellish and walk you through that alternatives analysis that the town was involved in. It wasn't just SBP. I mean, there were others that were involved that came to this conclusion. And so I think that that's very important. When we look at alternatives analysis, we have to look at what we were looking to accomplish. So there were a couple of other items that were commented on. First of all, I don't believe that we've done monitoring since the removal order. And we haven't recovered sand since the removal order because we're not allowed to under your order that was upheld in court. So that's why there's not recovery that's taking place at this stage. We're hoping, and that's why we went through this process, that we're going to come to a conclusion where we have the sand nourishment with the geotubes. It's a package. No one is looking to have geotubes as the sole protection for the bluff. It has to be both. And when we were ordered for removal, then the sand stopped. We're hoping that this is approved, that we meet the performance standards, and so it can be approved. And then we'll go back to doing this dual protection, which is the geotubes with the sand. We couldn't agree more, and I think I said this the last time with Commissioner Blaine and others who want to make sure that we have the right failure criteria and we have an enforceable removal order as part of this order of conditions. As you know, as a commission member, conditions are attached so that you meet the performance standards. So, that's why we want to have the sand. That's why we have the monitoring. And if there is a failure at some point, that's why you want to have a enforceable removal order so that you meet the performance standards, because ultimately the geotubes would have to be removed. We've agreed that would be clearly a condition before any construction could take place. So I think those are just my general kind of comments, because I would like to turn over to Dwight just to talk a little bit more about Dr. Kriebel's alternative that's been endorsed by others, but also to remember that we're the project proponent here with the town. This is a joint provision, so this isn't a question of everyone picking this for us. We have to demonstrate that the alternative that we have selected is not going to have an adverse impact with the conditions attached to the downstream resource areas, which we believe it does. And I would like Dwight and maybe Gordon, if he has a couple of comments, to comment on that alternative. And thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. But before I recognize them, I just, if you could clarify, are you saying that because there was a removal order that you no longer had any obligation under the orders of conditions? Because I'm very surprised. And I think clearly we're going to need a legal opinion on that. And secondly, before the removal order, I believe you were at least 80,000 cubic yards shy of what you were supposed to produce under the original OOC, which now is considerably more, which seems to be brushed aside by your group, to be honest with you. So
Well,
that's my comment.
A couple of things. I mean, through 2022, it was very clear to us that there was sufficient sand out there to cover the geotubes on a after storm event. That while we know that there isn't sand now to cover those geotubes, that was taking place when the legal action went forward. It was for a revocation of the order of condition. A revocation of the order of conditions takes away any authority we have to perform under that order, and that was upheld in court. And I believe that we were going forward with a removal order until there was a group that formed to determine whether or not it was appropriate to remove the geotubes, that maybe there was another way for this to proceed. And that's where the alternative came up, and that's where this notice of intent came up, and that put the removal orders, I understand, on hold, so that hopefully we come to a resolution so that we can get that sand back as part of this nourishment as soon as possible. We would love to be able to do that. But I don't believe that we think that we have that authority, Mr. Chairman, at this stage to perform that maintenance.
Clearly, but be that as it may, you are actually 80,000 cubic yards shy before the removal order. That was one of the issues. And then you didn't come back to the commission for a modification of the OOC. You just ignored the OOC, which from my perspective, was rather irresponsible, if I may say that politely. So would you like me to?
I was involved in those discussions.
Okay.
I know that what took place afterwards was very positive, which was an attempt to protect the bluff and to provide sand nourishment. I think every step that we've taken since then has been to that end.
Thank you, sir. Dwight, please go ahead.
Yes, just as Mr. Nyland asked me to comment on a couple of things, but before I comment on the couple of things that Mr. Nyland asked, I just want to make one comment about the sand template and where it stood and where we were about 2 years ago. At the end of the 2022 sand year, which was March 31, 2022, sand had been placed in slight excess of the 22 cubic yards per linear foot. There had been a sand deficit makeup plan submitted to the commission by the SBPF that was very similar to that proposed by others. The actions continued that led to the removal order. The template being full in the spring of 2022 allowed SBPF to continue recovering the geotubes after erosion events throughout the rest of 2022 and throughout 2023 until the late fall of 2023. It's been the contractor conducting inspections after storms as required and weekly, so that's to document what's been exposed and recovering them. In the late fall of 2023, the template was getting too thin because sand had not been placed on the template because of the removal order. This winter, some additional plan was placed on the template, and get some additional sand covered, but that obviously has been eroded off. So I just wanted to, provide that a little bit more detail. Mr. Nyland hasn't been involved with all those details throughout the last several years as others on the team have been. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Number two, on the alternatives, and as I said, I had provided some initial comments regarding Dr. Kriebel's alternative that was been proposed tonight. And, we will provide a more thorough response to that. But one of the things I want to comment about the notion that the alternatives analysis was, 1.25 pages, as indicated in that alternatives analysis, that what's provided there is a summary of actions that have been pursued, both in theory and in practice, to help stabilize the coastal bank known as Sconset Bluff. Those have been actions that have been implemented and proven not to be effective in this high energy environment. Those have been actions that have pursued extensive permitting, including environmental impact report analysis and reviews, such that then they were withdrawn because of the opposition to those projects. So yes, we presented a summary of those, and some of those items that were identified as being, a few paragraphs, a few lines or a short paragraph, are backed up by thousands of pages of environmental impact report and analysis, or had been rejected, had the permits have been rejected. So, if a permit has been rejected, I think that it shows the alternative is not available. So, but we can, document that a little bit further. And with that, I think I just want to, I don't want to get into a whole discussion right now of 540 versus 1100, but we are seek to develop a project, as Mr. Nyland mentioned, that's a comprehensive project that provides the protection of the bluff, balances coastal bank protection, as well as beach access. And I think Gordon can just speak, Mr. Thompson can just speak to that briefly relative to the various cross-sectional areas.
Thank you. Before I recognize him, Seth, do you have a question for Mr. Nyland or Dr. Dunk? Or do you want to wait?
You can let Mr. Thompson speak first.
Sure, absolutely. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson. Or good evening, excuse me.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having me here. Yes, just to follow up on what Dr. Dunk has said, we have done over the years a very comprehensive alternatives analysis. In looking at the volumes that could be placed, we have looked at cross-shore transport. There is near-shore cobble that in previous alternatives analyses have come to the fore as being something we want to avoid covering. So there is a balancing act between how much sand you can place on the beach without it being swept offshore into the cobble. As you do place sand further or closer to the mean high water, you will also start to increase losses of sand. Essentially, you now start to get into diffusion effects. And so these are elements that we have considered and have been trying to balance between having the sand available to move into the system, at the same time having the geotubes covered, but acting as a last line of defense should there be multiple storm events in a row. Thank you.
Thank you. Seth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize for speaking on the same thing multiple times today, but I want to be abundantly clear about the alternatives analysis. And first, I want to say I agree with Mr. Nyland wholeheartedly that it's not the Conservation Commission's purview to tell applicants what to do. I'm not saying that we should just pick a random alternative because someone in the public brought it up and tell you to do that. But it is our purview and our role, absolutely, to receive a robust review of all alternatives from the applicant and show why they could or could not work. And I want to just really quickly read the actual performance standard. So performance standard number 1 in coastal banks. I'm going to read the last sentence. It says, other coastal engineering structures may be permitted only upon a clear showing that no other alternative exists to protect the structure that has not been substantially improved or public infrastructure built prior to 978 from imminent danger. So what we're trying to protect against is imminent danger. When we talk about long-term, short-term, middle term, everybody has their own opinions about what they want to go into place here. But the regulation that we actually, the performance standard that we actually have to uphold is imminent danger. So Linda, I hear what you're saying, but our regulations actually speak in opposition to what you're saying. And in regards to Mr. Dunk's comment and some other comments that have been made, you know, I mentioned the 1 1/4 pages, not to say that it's the 1 1/4 pages that's the problem. And I know a robust analyses have been done in other arenas, like in the Arcadis process and in the court decisions you're referencing in the EIRs. All I'm saying is that all of that information needs to get into this record. So it's part of this this permitting process. And if that's as simple as, you know, creating an index that has all of those decisions in it and all of the justifications in it, it may be that. Or in some cases, it may be looking at alternatives that haven't really been explored here and fleshing them out a little bit. But we do need that in this record. So I respectfully request that. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And Linda, I see your hand up.
I understand imminent danger. I'm not an idiot. However, what I'm saying is that wherever we end up here, it has to be for the long haul, not just a dune that's going to be wiped out in 2 storms. That's all I'm talking about. I understand the imminent danger standard, but I think we have to look at the big picture here.
Thank you, Linda. And I don't think anyone thinks you're an idiot. So rest assured. Chip, you've had your hand up. Is that you wish to add and you're muted at this point?
Just to bring it to closure, I wasn't here for the first several minutes of the meeting, so have we arrived at where we're going in terms of having a couple more meetings on this matter? If you had that discussion, my team will update me, but I think we just want to provide a very short response to what we heard tonight, and we're going to follow up, obviously, with something in writing. I don't think we have anything else to offer, but we just want to make sure that this stays on track, and didn't know if you had selected the meeting dates for us proceeding.
Thank you. No, we hadn't. And that brings us on. We might as well take your suggestion and discuss the next meeting date. And we have, Dwight, I see your hand up, but I was actually going to ask Jeff to bring us up to speed about our request for independent counsel. If, Jeff, you think that we should address that now before making a decision on when we're next going to meet, because they sort of are connected, or?
Sure, I can update on all of those. So
okay, thank you.
If it's helpful for the discussion for setting future dates. So I'll just run through really quickly. Beta is our third-party reviewer. They are under contract. They are working away. I know we'll have some regular check-ins with them kind of at a staff level, and I know on occasion and not uncommonly, if they have questions, they can run those through our office to the applicant and those things too, just for some clarity purposes. So we'll hopefully have that back in the next couple weeks. the legal counsel to kind of update on that. And I was waiting to talk to everybody about this to get some thoughts and guidance on there. As you guys know, the commission accepted a proposal from the law firm Beveridge and Diamond, which I just have to say is still a great name, Beveridge and Diamond. But they sent a proposal in that was accepted by the commission. It was put forward to the select board. That proposal was for right around $25,000. The select board authorized $10,000. Beveridge and Diamond then declined and said that they were only able to do it for the $25,000. You know, since that point, they also suggested someone else we could look at. We've been reaching out to the other folks. I'm sorry, I don't have that name handy right now. So I think we're at either an impasse where we can either ask the select board to reconsider, which I think is fair. I think you can also, we can wait and see if we get a response from the other respondent as well, or we always have the opportunity. I mean, and I don't think it hurts to say is we don't necessarily have to listen. I think that's wise guidance from any attorney will say, is I can give you my guidance is, you know, those questions, we can always get opinions. There's obviously a lot of attorneys here. The town has town council still to get those while we're sorting out the independent review. But I think those are our options for independent legal review for those 4 questions that you guys had. I know it seems like there may be a couple other additional questions that have come up, but that's kind of where we are with that.
Thank you, Jeff. Linda?
I would make a motion to ask the select board to reconsider. The firm made an excellent pitch. They had a lot of skill in this area, and I'm afraid if it's only 10,000, we're going to get what we pay for. So I'd be willing to make a motion to ask the selectmen to reconsider so we get adequate and expert legal counsel.
Thank you.
I'll second that if you'll allow it.
Absolutely. So by roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Jim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. So I would suggest that we defer to staff going forward if this is acceptable to the applicants for when we next meet, because clearly we're going to want both the independent review and the opinion of independent legal counsel before we proceed to make a decision. So
well, we clearly need to hear from your peer reviewer. The commissions want to hear, and we have one more meeting ourselves where we would respond to what's taken place tonight. We could go forward and make our presentation, and you could have your peer review after that. I think we probably have, I would say, at least 2 and probably 3 meetings left before we close this.
Yeah.
So I think if it's helpful, Mr. Chair, sorry to
absolutely
for interrupting. I'm kind of looking at our schedule, and obviously we don't have to be beholden to Thursdays, but it usually works best because that's where people have kind of blocked out. We obviously don't have a regular meeting next week. We have one the 25th. That would make available also as an alternate week then May the 2nd as an alternate Thursday. And then we have a regular meeting on May the 9th. That may be in jeopardy a little bit with town meeting being that week. And then we have in May a meeting on, our following meeting from the 9th is on the 23rd. So that would give us the 16th as well. So
I'm not here on the 16th. I think that's why we did not do it the 16th.
Yeah, nor am I.
Well, could we continue then to the 25th, Mr. Chairman, and that would allow us to submit information next week in preparation for that?
So do you mean the 18th of April or the regular meeting on the 25th?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Jeff indicated the 25th was like, is the 25th is your regular meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, the 25th is our regular meeting. The 18th is our off week. We had a 3-week break because next week is school break, and we try to avoid that because we tend to lose people.
No.
May 2nd, maybe?
Yeah, May
May the
2nd
2nd
works
would
for
work.
me. Yeah.
I'm unavailable on May 2nd, but I'm just one person.
Well, I'm unavailable. I'm almost certainly unavailable May 2nd because I'm going to be in the middle of Oregon. And so I would just as soon not miss a meeting.
Yeah, and I would say that if your chair and vice chair are both not going to be there, it's probably a good meeting date.
Yeah.
Let's just go to the 9th then.
Well, the 9th of May, we have a regular meeting, Linda.
I know.
Well, how about this as an idea, just to play it out, is we can get our request in to the select board to reconsider. If they do, and I can probably get a firm date, if we continue to the 25th of April, we can at least get those timelines for those reviews in front of everybody. We can get hopefully some level of response from SBPF or anyone else that wants to submit for the regular meeting that night. And based upon the volume of information, what's there, we'll also have an idea on the number of regular applications that may make somewhere like the 9th more available. And we can always squeeze it in, right? We can always try to do, you know, a little bit of both if the agenda for the regular meetings isn't ginormous. To try to
We'll know all that on the 25th. We should have a better idea of everything
Yeah.
on the 25th.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll know that for sure because the filing deadline for May the 9th is April 18th. So we'll know exactly what the load will be for that night, give or take.
Ian or Jeff, could we meet an hour earlier on that just to help our Wisconsin friends?
On the 25th?
Sure.
Yeah.
We could meet at 4.
Yeah, I don't think our presentation is going to be to the extent that it was the last, we're going to be responding to public comments. We're going to talk about the alternatives analysis and the alternative that we discussed tonight. So, it's not going to be a 2-hour presentation by us, clearly. So if we could take maybe take that first hour from 4 to 5, that would help.
All right.
Works for me.
Does that work for
Works for
everybody?
me.
We'll
Yep.
start at 4 p.m. on the 25th, and we'll add this as the first item on that agenda.
Okay. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
keep
thank
the
you.
ball moving.
Okay. So that brings us to the discussion of the removal order
So
for SB 48 is, yes, go ahead, Jeff.
we just added that on. We've been getting a lot of questions from time to time. The
Right.
date of that removal order right now is May the 9th. So we can certainly take that up as part of the meeting on the 25th.
Okay.
As well. But we just wanted to at least keep track of it for everybody just to kind of have
Excellent.
it in their head.
Thank you. So without further ado, a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Mike. By roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody, and have a very good night.
Thank
Well
you.
done,
for your
Ian.
expertise. Thank you.
To everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.